I'm on Kildare Street, where the march was due to arrive at around 2 o'clock to meet the Minister for Justice, Michael McDowell. But of course there have been a series of demonstrations right around the capital, some very violent. We've already seen cars overturned, there have been reportings of people being lynched, and also we've seen just down the street the PD office has been attacked, table thrown right through the window, and the rioters have now dispersed all around the city. Riot police are on standby and Gardaí are trying their best to contain the violence. With the mob threatening more violence, Gardaí are left with no option but to push them back in the direction of O'Connell Street. They end up on nearby Westmoreland Street, and this is where some of the worst clashes of the day take place. Gardaí begin to take firm action and chase those they've seen causing or inciting trouble down the street. Determined not to let them flee the scene, the troublemakers are pinned to the ground. Some still try to resist capture. This evening, Gardaí say they've arrested at least 37 people in connection with the violence. Locals, tourists and bystanders say they've never witnessed such aggression and anger on the streets of the capital. What was supposed to be a Love Ulster parade has turned out to be quite the opposite. Dimitri O'Donnell, TV3 News, Dublin City Centre.
The first of our reports from the scene is from Barry Cummins.
Loyalist marchers came to Dublin at lunchtime to walk a route from Parnell Square to Leinster House that had been agreed with authorities. The march never left its starting point. As the bands and marchers prepared to head off, up to 300 people had gathered to protest at the march. Some of those protesters were gathered at the Parnell Monument at the top of O'Connell Street. Suddenly, Gardaí, journalists, photographers and cameramen came under attack in acts of indiscriminate violence. Slabs of concrete which had been lying on the ground were used as weapons. Bricks were thrown and bottles. Firecrackers were also hurled at random targets. A number of Gardaí were injured on O'Connell Street. They were dragged to safety by their colleagues. RTE journalist Charlie Bird was singled out by a group of men who began attacking him. He was rescued by Gardaí.
Listen, it was all over in seconds, but they just repeatedly punched me in the face with their fists, and I just ran. I couldn't believe it. But there was absolutely no doubt that the people who set upon me, they knew who I was, they knew that I worked for RTE, and they described me as an orange bastard.
Within minutes of these attacks breaking out, the violence had spread down O'Connell Street. Garda riot squad officers coming under attack. Saturday shoppers and tourists fled the scene as gangs of mostly young men continued hurling bricks and setting fires on the city's main street. Some shops were looted. The riot squad managed to split the rioters into smaller groups and carried out a number of arrests. One gang had moved down to Aston Quay near the Halfpenny Bridge and continued throwing objects. Today's violence on Dublin's streets left 14 people in hospital.
Expectation of a baton charge by Gardaí led to fear among the crowd on O'Connell Street at 2 o'clock. As the Gardaí moved in, the crowd splintered.
After half an hour of taking bottles, bricks and anything that's been lying on the street, the police are now trying to clear O'Connell Street. Some of the demonstrators are running down the road, heading to Leinster House.
It was clear roadworks were being used to get weapons. On the way down to Kildare Street, windows were smashed and shopkeepers terrified.
A group of them rushed in, probably 20, 30 rushed in, tried to take bottles, knocked over things. We got them out, locked the door, and then they got a barrier. A group of them had a barrier and smashed through the window there.
The headquarters of the Progressive Democrats had its windows put in. Then the riot arrived at Nassau Street. Huge plumes of smoke went up as cars were set ablaze. Garda reinforcement arrives as the chaos was ongoing.
They were just bashing up cars and throwing burning boxes into the cars, and I mean the car that was upside down over there was just went up in a huge flame. It was a small explosion, and I mean the smoke was, you couldn't see the street.
Fairly quickly, Gardaí in riot gear moved onto the street and started to push everyone back down. The rioters moved on as the Garda numbers increased. The people were left to count their losses.
They broke into the car too, which surprises me, because they took things out of it. You know, I thought they were just rioters and they were just doing damage as they went, but they're obviously just good old-fashioned criminals, just thieves.
This is what Nassau Street looked like after the riot. on what had been a packed Saturday on a rugby weekend.
It leaves a very bad impression. Nassau Street is a very strong tourist street, and all of the tourists who were on the street were bewildered that this kind of thing would happen in Dublin.
What should have been a weekend of celebration will now only be remembered for riots and fear. Paul Cunningham, RTE News, Dublin.
Dublin City Council has strongly defended its preparations to secure building works on O'Connell Street in advance of today's protest. Council officials put the cost of the clean-up in O'Connell Street alone at €50,000.
A major clean-up is underway in Dublin city centre this evening following today's demonstrations. O'Connell Street has been undergoing a major facelift in recent months, and protesters smashed down protective fencing to gain access to concrete blocks, wooden planks, steel poles and paving slabs, which they used to smash windows and attack Gardaí. A large skip was set on fire in front of the GPO. Dublin City Council has been criticised for not doing enough to secure the building works in Dublin's main thoroughfare.
I would have thought that in the context of the march in the first place, because this is the first such march that has ever taken place here, that a lot more thought and planning would have gone into the preparation of the march and the security for the march than seems to have been the case.
That criticism has been strongly rejected by council officials.
These people would have torn down whatever type of fencing we had. It was very, very difficult to seal off a work site in absolute terms. We did what we could, and as I said earlier, we could not have foreseen this.
It's estimated the clean-up for O'Connell Street alone will cost €50,000. Paul Maguire, RTE News, Dublin City Centre.
People also using bottles, throwing them as well. But there is an element that we've seen in these pictures today. Certain people came here today with items, pool balls, snooker balls. They also brought petrol bombs, firecrackers. Certain people, it does appear, came here today, Brian, with the very intention of causing random violence, random hurt that we have seen today.
Barry, just briefly if you can, you were there from the very beginning. What was your sense of how prepared or otherwise the Gardaí were for this? Were they, well, clearly they weren't expecting trouble on this scale. What from your assessment, were they expecting?